We're live! Okay, hello everyone. We are here with Jennifer, and we are going to have a little conversation this morning about the shifting landscape of education, specifically alternative education through the lens of world schooling and things like that. So, Jennifer, thank you so much again for taking the time to share a bit about your journey in this space. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's really fun to be here. I'm excited.
Yeah, so I know we originally connected through the San Marcos community group, and I saw some different things you were doing in that space. What's your relationship been like with the lake since like recently?
Well, recently and over the long haul, I was almost born there. My parents just dated on that lake, and that's my theory on why I have such a connection to that place. And as somebody who spent time in San Marcos, you'll know exactly what I mean by that. So I have a very long connection to the lake. We went back for the first time, post the Civil War in 2009 with my family. It was the first time I had been back, and fell in love with it, as you do. And I've been working and living there part-time ever since. So our kids spent a couple of years of their childhood there in pieces off and on. And I go at least twice a year, but often more than that. In fact, I said to you before we went live that I'm living in Canada right now, but only for another week. And I've rented my house here, and I'm going to spend most of the winter in San Marcos in Guatemala.
Ah, yes. I figure like if you're from the East Coast or places where it gets really, really cold, I'm like, winter might be the time to go, to another place and enjoy that. But yeah, I've always been curious how people balance like living in different places, or like, I don't even have the words for it, but having a secure home base, maybe like in a home country or like a country we're a citizen in, and then balancing that with longer term travel or like residency in a different country.
Yeah, I mean, for us, that's been a journey. We sold our house and our life and like everything we owned in 2008 and took off with our kids. And we thought we were just going to travel for 1 year, ride our bicycles from London, England to North Africa and back, which we did. But then, that turned into over a decade of full-time travel because everyone was having a good time and figuring out how to live and work from anywhere, all of those kinds of things. I just bought this house just over 3 years ago, I guess now. So this having a place and then being elsewhere is a new phase for us, and we're actually really enjoying it. And I intentionally bought the house in a place that it would be super easy to rent anytime we wanted to.
Yeah, that's always a cool move, and then that becomes like an asset if you would want it to be that, as you're somewhere else.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so that's been good. Yeah, for us, it's the blend that works right now. But my kids have all grown up now and they're gone, so it's just my husband and I. And I'm gonna get to Guatemala kind of circuitously via Europe and Hawaii, and he's riding his motorcycle from here all the way to San Marcos. Yeah, so he'll meet me there for the first time, hopefully.
Oh, awesome. I'm curious. Before we get deeper into questions, I just want to do intros really quick. If you'd want to introduce yourself for people that aren't familiar with you or your work yet.
Oh, you're frozen for me.
Did I unfreeze? Am I back?
Oh, there you're back. Good.
I am back. Yeah, you froze for like half a second and then you came back.
Oh, you were frozen for quite a while. So
I thought you were pondering, and then I was like, oh.
Everyone else thought I was too. Yeah, good thing I wasn't like scratching my nose or something. So intros to what aspect of it? Travel, world schooling, education. I missed part of what you said.
Yeah, just introducing yourself specifically in the world schooling educational sphere.
Right. Okay. So I guess the first thing to say is I was originally a teacher, and that didn't last very long because I very quickly recognized that I didn't know what we were going to do if we had kids, but it couldn't be that. But knowing what you don't want and knowing what you do want are two very different things. And so there was a period of sort of re-education. I have 4 kids. They did not go to school at all until university for some of them. And that was a philosophical choice for us. So a lot of people in the world schooling space they decide they want to go have this big family adventure, and then they need to figure out the education piece. For us, it was quite the opposite. Travel was an active part of our educational strategy from the beginning, and we knew that we wanted to do some big time travel with our kids. We did a lot of, test trips and short trips a month here and there when they were quite small. And it wasn't until they were 5 through 11 that we took off full time. And that was in 2008. I've spent a lot of the last 20, 25 years helping people create world-class educations for their kids outside the 4 walls of a classroom. So within that world schooling community, there are a lot of families that are our friends and, kind of co-laborers with us in this educational process, both while our kids were young, but then also as other people's kids have come up and other people have joined the community. Our blog early on was one way that people found us a lot. My daughter has done a bunch of writing in the world schooling space. She's got one piece that periodically comes back around and goes viral about how 10 reasons world schooling ruined my childhood, or something that she wrote when she was 15 or 16. And we were talking about it the other day. She's like, "Oh my gosh, Mom, it's so cringy because I was just 15. I'm like, that's actually kind of what's great about it, is that all of your 15-year-old sass is right there. So yeah, this is not a new community for us, but it's one we've chosen to remain active in, even though our kids are grown and gone now. Because of the amazing gift that this lifestyle and this way of learning has been to our family and to our kids. And I so want other people to have that. Like, if it's in their heart and if it's in their, if they want to go do something with their kids, I want to help people figure out how to do that, because we could not have imagined the difference that it would make for us as individuals, for our family, for the relationships we have, for the quality of their education. We couldn't have ever imagined it. And to be able to encourage other people who are nervous about all the same things we were to begin with, that it's going to be okay. We know many, many families who've gone all the way through. Kids have gotten into university, if that's the thing that people worry about, or gone on to successful lives. There are lots of examples of it going really beautifully. And so to me, it feels important, as one of the older moms, to kind of hang tough with people who are in the trenches now.
Exactly, like becoming an advocate for someone who's been through it. So I'm curious, when you were a teacher, what were the things that really shifted you philosophically to want to have your own children in more of a world schooling context?
Well, it's interesting. I come from a long line of teachers. So my grandmother taught in a one-room school in Starkey, Michigan in the 1920s. My parents were both educators. It was something that it's just highly valued in our family, and it was something that I had always wanted to do. But then, you spend all that time and money getting a thorough indoctrination in this one way of looking at education. And then you get in the classroom and you discover that it's kind of totally a different thing. And my first teaching experience was in Crispus Attucks Middle School in Indianapolis, Indiana, as a student teacher. And we had 2 police officers to the floor for 6th grade. And this was in 92, 93. And school was about a lot of things, but it wasn't about the best interest of the kids or their academic education. And that was demoralizing for me, And then as I began to learn more about the origins of the education system, which of course they don't teach you completely when you're becoming a teacher, and more and more of the philosophical and political agendas that were baked into it, I realized I just could not continue to be part of something that caused trauma and caused harm, which it does for many of the kids that attend. So that was the beginning of my journey away from it. And then, discovering that there were all these other really great alternatives, and education is not one size fits all. And, we absolutely can tailor make it to the kid. And why aren't we doing that on a larger scale? So that's where my heart is now.
Exactly. Thank you for sharing. I'm curious, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm curious how long you were in the more traditional educational context before you shifted out of it. Like, was it a while, or you dipped your toe in? And
no, it was pretty well immediately. I did, after I decided not to continue with classroom teaching, I did for a while work with an organization that did sex education in schools. So I would go from school to school to school for a couple of more years and just teach that in certain grade levels. And that was okay. but during that time, what I was really working on was figuring out, like, well, what are the alternatives? How did I get through an entire myself and 4 years of university and not get a peek behind the curtain? Like, how did I not know this was what was going on? And that, that was several years of work for me. And also probably some of the best work that I ever did ultimately.
Yeah. Awesome. And for people that are curious about learning more, peeking behind the curtain, so to speak, about the traditional educational system, do you have like books or resources about like where to send them to get that education?
Yeah, I mean, one of the books that was really fundamental for me, and it's still out there, it's a giant book. It's called The Underground History of American Education by John Taylor Gatto. He's written a lot of shorter books that are great, but this one is like the Bible of why education is the way it is. And he was New York City and State Teacher of the Year. So he was kind of the NEA's poster boy. Retired, did the research, and wrote the book because he spent his entire career banging his head against the wall. Trying to advocate for students and being cut off at every turn. So, for me, the turning point was realizing that there was a philosophical disconnect. Like the education system comes from a particular philosophy, and it creates a very consistent product. And if you are of that philosophy and that product is what you want, then it's probably going to work pretty well for you and for your kids. If you have a different philosophy, or if you want a different outcome, then you also are going to probably bang your head against the wall for the 12 years of your kid's education or longer. And when I realized that there was just a philosophical disconnect, that for me was super freeing, because then that allowed me to let go of the trappings of all that this was and recreate something from the philosophy that I have that matched who we were, what the outcome was that we wanted for our kids, and to do something totally different, because it wasn't about fixing a broken thing. It was about acknowledging that this thing just is what it is, and it's great for some people, but not the majority of people. And if you want something else, this is what you need to do.
Exactly. And when you made that shift, I'm assuming it was before social media and like Facebook groups where you could really plug into like a hive mind of like minds. So like how was connecting with people in alignment with your actual philosophy?
Not great, if I'm honest. Homeschool groups did exist all across the United States 25 years ago, but they were fairly analog. They were fairly in person, and most of them were religious in nature, which is okay, but has always been a struggle for me also. And we, in the United States specifically, we owe a lot of our educational freedom to the religious homeschoolers who really pushed on that in the 80s and early 90s. So, I've got a great deal of respect for that, but I didn't really fit super well with a lot of those groups. And one of the things that's been a blast for me has been to watch the growth of social media and the online connections that have happened specifically in the world schooling community. I mean, some of those early groups, like Families on the Move, was maybe the first sort of world schooling group in 2009, I think it started. And there were like 10 of us in there to begin with. It was like, oh my gosh, my people, this is amazing. And we started with little meetups here and there, which grew. And, now there are all of these amazing groups, some of them with tens of thousands of members. And they're all people who meet up, they connect, they share educational resources, their kids get to be friends. Like, it's an incredible network now. So much good.
Very, very cool. And I'm so grateful for people that were still seeking out that connection, who didn't give up or like compromise their values just because there wasn't that abundance of ease in connecting with other people. Like I'm saying, I'm grateful as well for what social media is doing in that space specifically. So another thing I'm curious about is I hear like the same thing over and over when people think about alternatives to education or world schooling. One of them is, if kids don't go down the traditional educational path, how will they properly be socialized? And I'm just curious how do you deal with people saying things like that? Do you take the time to educate them, or at this point you're like, whatever, to each his own?
No, I absolutely do. Because I think that's really important for, you know, for everyone else. I met some brand new world schoolers this last weekend. They found us through a book that we were in, and they came and spent the weekend with us. And they just started last year homeschooling, and they're just taking off on their first world schooling trip next month, which I'm so excited for them.
Yes.
And they're the first people that I've ever met who have not had somebody say to them, "Oh, what about socialization?" And I thought, great, maybe we're finally moving the needle on that. You know, if they're now like a year and a half into this and nobody has nailed them to the wall. Now, I think COVID probably has helped people's attitude because
they're like, no one socializes. It's fine.
Yeah, but that question, which you get on loop often, presupposes that school is a normal social environment. And that's a very big presupposition because it absolutely isn't. You know, it was a created social environment, and it was created with an agenda. And before industrialized schooling, normal socialization happened in families and in communities and across generational gaps. Big kids played with little kids. Like it was a much more homogenous society. We didn't have age segregation. We didn't suffer with ageism. We didn't segment what we were learning into certain buckets that only certain people got to learn at certain times. So, you know, first I ask people, you know, why are you asking that question? Like, what do you assume is a normal social outcome? Because I think often people haven't thought of it. You know, once they begin to think of it, they come to it themselves. And then the other question that I ask, sort of tongue in cheek, is like, you know, because people will say, well, aren't you worried about socialization? Haven't you thought about that with your kids? I'm like, yes, I have. That's why they're not in school. Like, how do you know, and people always have that reaction. They always laugh. They're like, damn, you know, but it's like, have you met the quote average, if there is such a thing, high school graduate out of public education in the States or Canada recently? Or you know, the trope, the stereotype of that person. I don't know about you, but that's not my goal.
Yeah.
You know, and so if that's the social output, if that's what we're normally socializing our kids to, I'm actually not interested.
Exactly.
You know, so freeing yourself and others from these accepted norms as if they are some gospel truth, and thinking a little bit more broadly and with a little more historical context around what actually is normal for human beings.
Yep. Exactly. Very, very well put. I just got done reading The Continuum Concept, if you've heard of that.
I haven't, but I'll add it to my list.
Yeah, it's a book. It's written by a traveler. She went to South America and studied and lived with some indigenous tribes. And she basically just saw how the children there were seemingly fundamentally different than the children she knew in the West. Like, they cried less. They seemed like more independent, all of these things. But a key component of it were things like socialization. Like they weren't isolated to their own social group. It was intergenerational and all of these really cool things, coming down to, the philosophical differences and values between people and how that can affect the children as they grow up, become adults, and then engage in the adult role socially. So there's the social myth. And then another myth or common thing that I hear is, okay, if kids are outside of the mainstream educational context, then how do they learn stuff? You know, how do they get that math and calculus and all that tedious info that I know I learned in school? Like, how will they
again
learn stuff? Oh, am I frozen? Let me know when I'm not frozen. Am I not frozen?
Oh, you're still frozen?
No.
Hey, there you are.
Hey. Yeah. So another question that I had is another myth, and it's basically like, the myth is how do kids outside of mainstream education learn stuff? Like, how will they be good at math? How will they be intelligent? It's as if without that, they exist in some bubble of not knowing anything. And I know how I would respond for sure, but I'm curious, do you also get that question? And then how do you respond to it?
Constantly get that question. Yep. The reality, of course, is that it's the wrong question. But that's a whole nother, when people are asking that question, what that indicates is that they haven't yet thought about it. And they also don't have an understanding of how it is that humans learn. Because self-directed learning is exactly how humans learn and have learned forever. And what most adults don't acknowledge is that self-directed learning is how they learn. So, you know, one of the obvious questions in retaliation to that is, well, I don't know, how do you learn the next hard thing you need to learn?
Oh, yeah.
You know, because the reality is that we all know how to self-direct. We know how to conquer a hard thing when we need to. Children also have this ability. We've been socialized out of trusting them to know their lived experience and to know what they need and to know how to move forward. It doesn't mean that there shouldn't be excellent facilitation, that there shouldn't be encouragement to tackle things that might not occur to them. There is a role for that. I'm not suggesting that kids just be, you know, placed in a cardboard box or out in the forest and just to let develop however they do. There's a role for good intentional facilitation and parenting in that space. But the idea that, you know, there are a number of things. One is curriculum is an absolutely arbitrary body of knowledge. Who decides what is taught and what matters? Curriculum is also completely outmoded and was made absolutely useless when we could pick up our phones and go, hey, Siri, the entire body of human knowledge is here. It's actually not about everybody being familiar with the same 3 of Shakespeare's plays or a particular textbook that's been approved for geometry. Like, it's no longer about that at all, because everything they need is here. So what is it about? It's about critical thinking. It's about practical skills. It's about human development. It's about learning how to exist in community. It's about the self-knowledge that is necessary to participate in those communities, to give back appropriately in the world. Those are the things that we need to be teaching. When you teach kids those things, grit, determination, resilience, all of those things, they will tackle the harder things in life. And the way you teach that is by modeling. You know, you do it with them, obviously. So I have a lot of thoughts and opinions about that kind of thing specifically, which is why we've started Omnis Education. To give parents and kids tools in that space. But the idea of worrying about whether or not they're going to get into college because they have the right body of knowledge is asinine, frankly. I mean, that it's just a question that is reflective of ignorance. And I'm always super happy to talk to people, because if they're asking that question, what they're doing is actively combating their ignorance, right? Like, they recognize, like, this is something I don't know and I'm curious about. So having those conversations, I think, is super important.
Exactly. I would agree. What are some other common myths or questions that people ask when combating their ignorance? Like, something you see over and over and over?
People are very concerned about qualifiers. Like, do you have qualified teachers? Are you certified? Is it accredited? And, you know, we got to dig down into why those things matter so much, particularly because companies like Apple and Google in 2018 said, you know, we actually don't care if you have a college degree anymore. Like, that's nice. It's not going to be a mark against you, but it's not also going to be an asset. Instead, they're moving towards a more competencies-based measurement for people that they hire. Can you demonstrate that you can do a thing? Which to me is a much healthier way of assessing somebody's ability than a resume and, you know, gatekeepers from pick a university. So, you know, understanding that the world is shifting away from this old model of doing things towards this more competencies-based, how can you show up in the world? What can you actually do? Acknowledging that there are going to be gaps. You know, people say, well, aren't you worried? What if there's a gap in their education? Well, wait a second. There's a gap in every education. You know, the whole body of knowledge leaves an immense number, so many. And those gaps are ones that we've all agreed that we're going to accept, right? So every education is going to have gaps. The body of human knowledge doubles every couple of years. It's impossible to teach everything. So the question then becomes, what should we teach? Is that a one-size-fits-all answer or not? I would argue that it's not. Because what a kid growing up in Montreal, Canada needs to know to survive and contribute to their world is wildly different than what the kids in our community in San Marcos need to know. And the most obvious one is the kids in Guatemala, they don't really need to learn French fluently. They just don't. So why when you go to school are the 3 languages that they push, English, French, German sometimes, maybe Spanish, depending on what you live. Why is Bahasa Indonesian not useful? Like, you know, why are we not learning Arabic? Why is Mandarin not being pushed? The idea that everybody must learn the same thing is just silly. There are gaps. Good with that. The kids will fill them as they need to.
Exactly. And since we are in this new internet age with an almost infinite body of knowledge at our fingertips, what do you suggest people do to balance that? Like, on one hand, it's very cool. We could dive deep and explore anything to our heart's desire. On the other hand, it can be and is overwhelming at times. So it's like how to stay focused with structure as a learner in this like sea of so much information these days.
I don't think that there's one answer to that. I think it depends a lot on the kids that you have. You know, some learners are sort of the mile wide, inch deep type. They want to know a lot of things about a few things about a lot of things. And then you've got the other kids that are deep dives where they will do only pick a thing for 6 months until they have exhausted the parents and all the information and all the things. And then they move on to another thing that they're deep dive. So, I mean, depending on the kind of learner that you have, depending on your family structure, depending on how you're world schooling and where you're world schooling, that's going to change and morph and grow over the lifetime of an education. And it'll be a constant negotiation, like lots of conversation around what everybody's needs are and how to meet those, not just for education, but for all the things, right? Is the constant compromise, I guess.
That makes total sense. It's like, it's unique, just like what you're wanting to learn is unique. So then how to handle that balance can be unique. And then, like you said, communication about needs and checking in being huge so that everyone's feeling good about it, you know?
As parents, I think, well, I shouldn't say this as a generalization. Many of the parents that I know, myself included at various points, have been looking for frameworks and blueprints. And we do that because of two things. We're motivated by an immense love for these children. We desperately want to get it right. And then also the flip side of that is fear that maybe we're not getting it right because we have stepped out of this established, accepted social structure for our kids' upbringing and their education. And that love and fear pushes us sometimes to look for alternative structures. Like, okay, we're not going to do public school, but we are going to do this quite rigidly. And we see that often in the world schooling groups where people will be so dogmatically committed to an idea that they forget to work with the kids that they actually have in front of them. Instead of, I say to people a lot, we have to work with the kids we have, not the kids we want from time to time. And so, you know, that concept of like, it's going to be different for everybody. There's not a framework or a structure that's going to last you the entirety of a childhood, especially if you have more than one child, you know, because they're all different. And by the time you have 2 or 3 or 4, in our case, that negotiation with 4 different individuals, and then within the community, and then within the unique relationships between each of those people, parenting books, in my opinion, suck because they're always an oversimplification and they're always selling like one person's experience. Like, this was amazing for me. And then you read the back of the book and like, this person had one child of one consistent gender. And you're like, okay, well, I mean, how does that work with my particular mix of adventurous people? So, you know, learning as a parent to trust yourself and to not fall prey to somebody else's framework for pick a thing, education, parenting, whatever it is, it's hard. And it's also, I think, vital.
Exactly. And you said you set off on your first world schooling journey and you were only going to have it be 1 year, but it ended up being longer than that.
Oh, you're frozen again.
Oh, can you hear me?
I have to wait to get the end of your question.
Let me know when I'm back. Am I back? Am I back?
You're back.
Yeah, I'm back. Okay, yeah.
You said you started for a year and then it ended up and then you froze.
Yes, dramatic pause. You set off for a year and then you ended up going longer than that 1 year, correct?
Yeah, we traveled full time for over 10 years with the kids. And as they started to grow out, I mean, we still travel a great deal of the time. The last really major sort of family trip, my husband sailed from here to the Bahamas and back over 10 months with all 3 of the boys by himself. Yeah, which is amazing. Our daughter was already gone at that point. Yeah, and I mean, we still travel a great deal of the time. So, you know, my dad is a great adventurer and did a lot of things kind of before there were cool ways to Instagram it. And it's always confusing to him when people ask about a particular trip because he's like, I think we're actually all still on the same trip.
Right.
Which is totally true, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to get upset when a trip would end, and then somewhere along the infinite journey something shifted, and I was like, I'm actually always traveling, just like we're always learning, we're always moving, we're always traveling, or that's like a way we can see it to feel more empowered or less stagnated if we do have this spirit of travel and adventure and like seeking of novelty.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that, you know, I don't know if other people agree with this or not, but I talk about a lot in world schooling, is that world schooling is not about whether you travel full time or how much you travel. It's a mindset to educate your kids in the real world, wherever you happen to be. So that can be at home, whatever that means for you. It can also be, you know, on 2-week vacations from their school system, if that's all you have, and summers. It can also be, you know, friends of ours who travel 6 months and are home for 6 months, or people who, you know, have home bases or don't have home bases. Like, there's not one way to define that. It's a commitment to educating kids in the real world where you are. And you're absolutely right that it's a mindset shift. For the parents, the kids are totally fine. This is a parent issue.
Exactly. When you set out for your initial first year of traveling and world schooling, did you have a savings where you were like, okay, I'm going to work, save up, and then travel? Or you were also doing the working? Well, I don't know. Yeah, just like social media, I don't know how fleshed out the online workspace was. So I'm curious how you like planned that and then managed that at first.
So we took off in 2008. My husband quit his job with Apple just after they handed him the first iPhone. So that was when, so there was no, this wasn't a thing. People stopped us everywhere to look at his iPhone because it was such a novelty. One of the best pieces of advertising that Apple ever did was to give every employee one. And yeah, no, the internet was not a thing in the way that it is now. Social media did not exist. Facebook was just in its absolute infancy. MySpace had kind of come and gone. Yeah, that was the internet it was. So there just wasn't a lot. Remote work, digital nomadism, that was not a concept yet. So we had saved and worked for 2 years to be ready to go. And we had money in stock and saved. And we were going to travel for 1 year on that. That was the plan. Family gap year, come back and then figure it out. Also, 2008 was the year the market crashed. So we were camped on the highest sea cliff on the Adriatic coast of Italy in a tent with our bikes. And my husband rolled over one morning and he said, shit, I think all of our money is gone. And I said, excuse me? And sure enough, all of our stocks were underwater because the market had crashed. And so then, you know, we had this small amount of liquid money in our account that we had, you know, because we'd left most of it in the market. And a choice to either go home immediately and get jobs and figure it out, or not, in which case also figure it out. And so what we decided to do was we continued with our bike trip. We went to Tunisia. We lived there for a winter, and we just rented an apartment and put our heads down and started to seriously apply ourselves to figuring out how to use our existing skill set in a new way to generate the income we needed to keep going. And it sounds really great from where we sit now, but that was a really tumultuous kind of 3 years of figuring that out, because remote work was not normal. It was not accepted by big companies or even by small ones. The connectivity was not there worldwide like it is now. Like, it was still the land of let's go find an internet cafe. And so there was just, you know, there was a lot of things to be overcome in that process. But the take-home message is, at the end of that 3 years of work, trying to figure it out, we were in a position where we were making more money than we'd ever made in our regular jobs, working sort of 20 hours a week while doodling around with our kids. And once we figured that piece out, once you can live and work anywhere, then the question is, well, where do we want to be? And so that's kind of where it got fun, you know, and we started to do more and to spend more time, you know, in other places doing other things. And the remote work thing has been amazing, like good for everyone. I would never go back. I'm not never. It would be a very difficult situation that would cause me to go back with my body to a job. Yeah. Because I love being a shuffle down the hall in my bunny slippers. Like, that's perfect.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when you were in that tumultuous space, were you looking for remote work, although it was less common, or you more so went down the entrepreneurial path?
Yeah, there really wasn't remote work. Like there weren't job boards where you could go find jobs. Like it just wasn't quite a thing. Gotcha. In 2008. My husband's skill set is in database development and design. And so what he does now is create databases for big companies. And he did that through we leveraged, contacts we'd had from our previous lives to find connections that would allow us to do things. And he did a lot of gig and contract work for a while. I repurposed my skill set into travel writing to begin with, because turns out in 2008, without the huge network of families, people were really interested in reading about long-term, from their perspective, crazy travel with kids. Yes. So I did a lot of travel writing that then morphed into editing. That then morphed into me working with Rolf for a while. And then from there, I moved into marketing, but all in the travel space. So over a period of years, I just sort of did the next thing and learned something new, self-directed learning style, in order to allow me to expand my skill set and build my career. And now, I'm the CEO of On This Education, which is my big swing for making true measurable change in education for kids around the world.
You said that was honest education?
Omnis. It's the Latin word for everyone. And what we're trying to create is education for everyone. And it's a platform for self-directed learners. But we're also in the process of doing the world's first, we think, large-scale test of self-directed education as a true alternative. We will have in the next 3 to 5 years, 30 to 50,000 learners that we get to do a test with. And if at the end of the time we will have a model and a scaffolding to replace any struggling education system anywhere in the world, because what we'll have is a childcare problem, not an education problem. So we're really excited about that. We're working with some organizations in Europe and also in the United States on that. And it's my hope is that the thousands of kids are freed from the structure that's not serving them as a result of this work that we're doing together. So it's gonna be fun.
What a beautiful hope. And you touched briefly on a childcare problem. Could you go deeper into that?
Yeah, well, school at the end of the day is as much about childcare as it is about anything else, because the reality is that parents need to work, right? And if you do not have the immense privilege and luxury to have one parent at home, which most people do not, childcare is an active issue for you. And so, if we can solve the childcare problem separate from the education problem, I think that'll be a much better path forward for a lot of kids. We're working on an option in New York City that will be a single site test of one version of this that will look a lot more like a co-working space for adults and kids. They can come and go from. Yeah.
And then what did you do for childcare with your children as you were navigating travel and this new work frontier back in the day?
We took turns. Yeah, because we are both, fully invested in raising our kids. We just took turns.
Okay, cool.
We didn't. I look back and I think, gosh, it would have been nice to have had a traveling nanny. It didn't even occur to me at the time. I didn't know anybody who did that kind of thing. Now I think I would do so many things more creatively or differently. But at the time, we just didn't have a lot of connections to other people, and we just did the best with what we had.
That makes sense. And I'm also wondering, you said there was a tumultuous time when the market crashed. I'm sure people can see a lot of almost glamorization of the lifestyle of like, oh, I get to travel everywhere, like work whenever, like what?
You're frozen again.
Oh no.
When you come back, maybe you can repeat the question.
Yeah. Let me know when I'm back.
So the last thing I heard you say was that there had been some glamorization of something, and then you totally disappeared.
Well, yeah, thank you for your patience. Just like in the travel space, it can look like, what people see on social media can be not the dark, harder times and struggles. Like what have been some other struggles as you've navigated this lifestyle?
People would say, it must be nice to just live your life on vacation. And I think, really, is that what we're doing here? Okay.
I've gotten that one before, and I took it so personally. I was like, I'm working my butt off.
Because everything that's hard at home, whether you have a family or you're just a single person traveling, all the hard things go with you. They just happen in places that you're not familiar with and languages that you're not fluent in. Like, where does that get easier? People just don't think about it, I think. But also there is, there's always that grass is greener thing. We all do that. Even if we stay in subdivision neighborhoods, you look at the neighbor's house and think everything is perfect, and you don't realize, what individual people are going through. There were lots of things that were hard, all of the stages of childhood through the teen years. Those are challenging years, no matter how you do them. To be doing them traveling sometimes added a layer of complexity to that. Finances were challenging through that transitional period for sure. Our marriage went through one of the most difficult and challenging transformations ever in our mid-30s while we were traveling. All of those kinds of things were still hard. And I think one of the things that I have become more committed to in maybe the last 5 or 6 years is a lot more authenticity around those kinds of things, because I am aware that people, for instance, with our blog, because I really firmly believe in consent and autonomy for children, nothing that was ever published on our blog was not read aloud to the family first, and everyone had the ability to say yes or no. And often people would say no, and so that one would go into a different folder and wouldn't be published. The result of that is that there's like this much of the surface of our lives that is shared, and it's not all positive, but like, I'm never going to air a kid's dirty laundry or talk about, a terrible thing that's happening in our marriage, because that disparages that person publicly, and we're just not going to do that. But I think we do have to be more honest as a group about the things that are really hard. And, one of my best friends who travels with me, she actually works with me at Conahel in San Marcos. She has decided that if I ever have time to write a travel memoir, that it should be called Downwind of Dog Shit, because the reality of travel is like, even in the most idyllic moment, you're like, what's that on my shoe? Damn it.
Yes.
And there needs to be more of that. Like, it is not easier to live this way. In fact, it's harder. It is worth it if this is your dream and this is what you're trying to accomplish, but it is not easier. And there are a lot of things that suck, and it's really hard. And Instagram is a huge flyer. Yep.
Yeah. Like, what are some things we can do to be more honest and vulnerable about the harder times? Is it just merely telling our own story and practicing that?
Well, I think context is important, right? Like, I'm not recommending that people start airing all of their dirty laundry completely widely, because the other reality is the haters and the trolls, which we got plenty of. You're ruining your kids' lives. You're ruining your own lives. You're a drain on society. Like, when you're at your most vulnerable, that's not helpful. But within the world schooling groups and communities that have emerged, I hope that we will see more struggle, more vulnerability, more openness to that, with less judgment.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I see a lot in the world schooling groups is some pretty harsh judgment around the way people parent or don't parent, the way they're married or not married, the way they travel or don't travel. We get so ideologically bound to what's right for us that we forget to extend grace to everyone else. And it makes it, there was an example a couple of weeks ago in one of the big world schooling groups where this mom who's got some kids that are struggling with gender identity asked a question. She asked it in a way that was not sensitive language-wise. She's obviously in a learning place. And instead of answering the question, which she had, the group ate her for lunch over her languaging around her kid's gender. And I just thought, wow, guys, like, you missed an opportunity to really help this lady forward. And instead we got bound up in the other things. And I think that pushes vulnerability to the margins. People don't want to open up and share if they have just witnessed somebody else be chewed up and spat out by the one group that should be understanding of how hard this all is to manage when you're not in a home environment. So that's my hope, is that the world schooling community in general will just grow a little bit emotionally, and will extend more grace to one another. Like, I used to know firmly a lot of things when my kids were all sort of 8 and under. And then the 20-year long haul just teaches you a few things about yourself and the whole process, and how truly not one size fits all it is. I think we need to do a better job of that for each other.
Yeah, that was a good example that you provided. You know, like that person was daring to challenge their ignorance, asking a question, and then, you know, gets their head bitten off.
Literally. And that's it's easy to do on social media. And also, I think we need to get super committed to not doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that kind of negative feedback or challenging feedback is best done one-on-one. You know, when you can see somebody's eyeballs and when you can have a conversation and feel their heart in a way, and to just slam that out online, like that feels like a misapplication of that space to me.
Yeah, and we now have these social media virtual spaces to connect with like minds and be like fortified or challenged, you know. As far as in-person spaces, are there particular like communities or spots on the world that are very understanding of this lifestyle, like vortexes, if you will?
Well, I mean, San Marcos is one, right?
Yeah.
Obviously. I think there's a, you know, and I don't know if they're vortexes or if they're just places that like-minded people have decided to create community. You know, there's quite a number of people in Bali. There are quite a number of people in Thailand. There's a population in India, of course. And, you know, there are places where people go to kind of create community together. I think we have to be careful about that too, because the other thing that I've observed in many of those groups is a neo-colonialism that's damaging to the local communities that they're in. And that's a place where we collectively have to continually hold up the mirror, because none of us are immune to it. And we all need to be checking ourselves very regularly.
Very, very true. On the neo-colonialism note, do you have like books or resources or like places people can go to challenge their ignorances there?
You know, off the top of my head, I don't. I wrote an article about it a few years ago that got some play on Medium. I can dig that up and find it for you if you want. But it was just, you know, based on the experiences that we had as individuals. So that's not necessarily representative of the entire community. But you know, the other thing that I see a lot in some of the world schooling groups on Facebook is people will say, well, are there places we can go to find, you know, like-minded people like us? And they're asking this in a group of 30 to 50,000 people. And I'm like, well, first of all, can you identify for us, you know, what these kind of people are that you're looking for? Because even within this group, there's a huge amount of diversity. You know, there's a large segment of the world schooling population that are very strict religious Mormons, right? And they exist in that same group with people who are absolutely neo-pagan and on the other end of the spectrum. And then those of us who fall anywhere in the middle, you know, who are agnostic with atheistic tendencies in my particular case, right? So making the assumption that people who world school are one group of people is also dangerous, because we're not. And I've met a lot of world schooling people that I love and I resonate with. I'm like, oh my God, these are my people. And then I've met quite a few who I'm like, okay, right. I mean, good reminder that not everybody sees life the same way.
Exactly. And what better like world schooling lesson? It's like people are different everywhere. Like, where do you fit in?
Where do you fit in? Absolutely. And, you know, that whole question of what is the meaning of life? Who am I? You know, this is one of the things, you know, in Omnis, we've thrown out the traditional curriculum, and instead we're organizing all of learning around these essential questions that we ask in life. Who am I? What is my responsibility to the community? What is my responsibility to the planet? Those kinds of questions are what we need to be solving and answering for ourselves at various stages of life, and hopefully returning to many times during life as we grow and as we evolve. So that's my encouragement to people, is they just really think about, you know, the answers to those questions and how they show up in the world.
Yeah, very true. And another thing is in the more traditional context, we see the parents, to generalize, right? The parents go off to work and the children are placed in school, 40-hour school week, 40-hour work week, and then everyone goes home and does whatever they do there. In the world schooling aspect, in your experience, what was it like that, as far as parents wear the hat of like, I'm learning money, and then kids wear the hat of like, okay, I'm just learning stuff? Are you very much like, to what degree were the children empowered to like make their own money and like work as modeling off of what you were doing? And then how were you integrating, like you're also the student, your inner child is continuously learning?
For us personally, or as a generalization in the community, do you mean?
For you personally.
So for us personally, obviously somebody had to make money. So there were times where it was like, okay, this is dad's 4 hours to work. Do not open that door unless the house is on fire. Nope. This is mom's 4 hours to work. Same rules, and the other parent would sort of, manage whatever might be happening. For our family, what worked well was to have mornings for school and work, afternoons for adventure. All of that happened together. We were often around the same table working on what we were working on, talking about what we were learning together. It was a very collaborative experience. My husband would tell you that he had a terrible public school education. He didn't hate the experience necessarily, but he just didn't learn very much stuff. And it was so interesting over the arc of educating our kids for him to go, oh, yeah, I guess I need to learn that too. Like, okay. And that's fine, right? Like learning it only sticks when it's relevant. And that's one of the problems with schools. It's often not made relevant. So when it was, he learned it. That was fine. But yeah, we definitely learned together. We encouraged our kids to experiment with lots of different things and entrepreneurship and, business ideas. They always found ways to work when they were traveling and do what they wanted. Our daughter started a business when she was 16. She came to me, she's like, Mom, I think I need to start a business. I was like, okay. She goes, yeah, because, I'm moving out in 2 years. And so I need to be able to support myself. I was like, great idea. And so she did, and she got her business off the ground. And when she went to university, which I paid for her tuition, she was fully self-supporting as an adult person. What was really funny was when she graduated at the top of her class with distinction, guess what? Kids who've never gone to school can do fine in university. She got a job in her field to continue to work on her business. So, there's lots of ways to do it. But I think in general, I know a lot of teens who are world school who are doing really interesting stuff with their time, because even if you're in a family that does very traditional educational schooling, like you're enrolled in an online high school or something, you still have so much more time when you're outside of the system, that just the availability of that time for creative boredom for young people, they learn musical instruments, they start businesses, they volunteer in community, they do all kinds of interesting things because they have the time and space to do it. And to me, that's been one of the biggest blessings of being outside of the system, has been the gift of their time and their childhood back to them. Like, what do you want to do with that? And it's been interesting. They've all done different things with it. But there's a lot of value just to having time and space to be creative, which kids in school often don't have.
Exactly. Or like in my experience in school, we'd have art class, but as soon as I would drop into like flow, so to speak, the bell would ring and then it'd be off to the next class where it might be math, a totally different part of the brain is then activated. Yeah. And it's like, oh, like, look, I didn't have that awareness then, but looking back, I'm like, oh my, you poor thing. Like you just dropped in. Now you have to shift. Okay.
Yeah. There's a lot of reasons why that bell system doesn't work, and why why having subject matter buckets doesn't work. I mean, we could talk for many hours about that, but I will spare you my soapbox.
Yeah. So just a few more questions because I want to be respectful of your time, but I want to ask how I know in your experience, you and your husband seem fairly aligned philosophically, but I know some people might be going through an awakening or a shift where they want to have their kids taken out of the traditional system, whereas their partner might not agree with that. Oh, no, I'm frozen. Am I back? Am I back?
This is a long freeze.
Oh no. Am I back? Am I back? Am I back yet?
Well, hopefully you come back.
Oh. Am I back yet? Am I back? Am I back?
Can you hear me?
Can you hear and see me?
I can. Can you hear and see me?
Okay, cool. Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, in short, my question was how do you deal with people when the parents aren't aligning philosophically on what to do with the children? I'm sure that comes up.
It does a lot. And I think that's actually more normal than not. Mm-hmm. My husband and I, because of the differences in our upbringings, we had a lot of these conversations before we had kids, and we took some parenting classes and coaching before we had kids, which was, it seemed funny to everyone we knew at the time, like, oh, aren't they cute? But actually was really useful for us, because otherwise we would have been fighting through a lot of that stuff real time with the kids, which wouldn't have been so great for us. But I think it's more normal than not to have a misalignment or a difference in growth curve in that for families. Again, it's not one size fits all, and I think remembering that for each parent, no matter how your family breaks down or looks, we're both motivated by the same two things. We're motivated by our immense love and our desire to get it right. And then also our fear of our own shortcomings, because we're all acutely aware of our own shortcomings. And that, the fear of getting it wrong for our kids is really powerful. And so I've known people who've done a lot of different compromises, sometimes putting kids in school and then world schooling around the margins, which completely can be effective. I have one friend who his divorce agreement makes it so that he can't do a lot of the things that he would like to do with his kids. And so he really goes the extra mile to make sure that in the time that they do have, he's really doing a lot of the outside the box, both thinking and adventure type stuff with his children. So there are ways to make compromises for that. And the reality is that no childhood is perfect or ideal. The idea that we can do it right as parents is an absolute fallacy. It cannot be done right. It cannot be done right. So, and I mean, especially after you have more than one kid, right? Like if you've got two, it's just not possible to do it right. So, what do you do? Well, you do your best. You do your best every day. And over the long haul, that best effort is almost always enough. Yeah, lots of compromises.
Exactly. And would you find also compromises as a family you were trying to decide what to do next? Like, would you vote, or like how would you shift?
Sometimes we voted. Sometimes it was determined by, cost and convenience. If we're on one side of the country or one side of the world and some child says, well, I'd like to go to the other side of the world. We're like, well, yes, we can do that, but not for another 9 months because it's a long way, right? So involving them in as many of the conversations around the realities as possible, not just the dreams. People say, oh, dream with your kids. Like, yeah, dream with your kids, but also let them know, like, these are the work constraints. These are the budget constraints. These are the physical constraints. This is what we have to consider for your siblings, learning difference or physical disability, or, including them in all of the complexities of adult thought around that, I think is really useful. And then we gave our kids a lot of choices around, what they wanted to see or do. And we tried to work in everybody's things along the way. One of the nice things about having a bunch of people in a family is that you don't have to teach compromise. It happens really naturally in life. Like sometimes we're all giving up so that this person can get what they really want passionately. And then knowing that later that person is going to give up something so that we can do the thing that we're really excited about. And I think those kinds of community development, we called it sort of others-centered living, a lot of fruit for young people because they learn how to do that community piece in a very small microcosm way.
Oh, exactly. And it helps inspire, like, knowing one's own
frozen
self.
again.
No, I'm frozen again. No.
You're back. Oh, she's gone. Oh, she's back.
Am I back?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, yeah. But yeah, like in making the compromises, I feel like it encourages like you to know yourself more, to be like, what would be my highest priority? Maybe I don't compromise on that. And then everything else I'm more flexible with, and then, yeah, teaching that in the microcosm of family to then be better service to the world.
And as your kids get older too, the other thing is, when you raise them with a trust and with the belief in their competence, what happens is by the time they're sort of mid-teens, they're fairly independent and autonomous humans. And all of our kids at that stage, 15 to 17 in there somewhere, took off and did their own thing. without the family. You know, one of our kids started his college work crossing the Med and the Atlantic on a sailing ship because he's passionate about sailing. And as an adult, sure enough, he captains large vessels and he builds boats for a living. You know, that's been in him since he was 4, right? So when he was 17, he was off to do that. We had another kid at 15 who said to us, can I go to Guatemala for the winter by myself? I would like to spend a month working with Conogel, actually. Yeah. And like the inside, he was 15, and the inside of my head was like, no, you absolutely can't. But what came out of my mouth with my self-training was, yes, you absolutely can. And here are all the things, you know, that you have to take care of before you can go. And I need those by October 1st because we need, you know, a few months to get things together. And lo and behold, he did it, you know. And I had another one who wanted to fly airplanes. And I said, okay, like, you should do that. And he kept saying to me, Mom, have you called the airport yet? Can I fly airplanes? And I was like, dude, I'm not the one who wants to fly airplanes. Do you want to fly with a pilot whose mommy had to set up the lessons? Because I just that doesn't seem safe to me. And, you know, and he was just like, right, okay. So at 15, he figured out how to take his flying lessons and do his things. And also he's in commercial pilot school now, right? So like, if you raise them to be autonomous people, to trust themselves, to know their own minds, to understand how to make these decisions with the massive amount of content that's available to them, it's not like my kids. My kids are actually not overly smart or special. This is what happens when kids are raised in freedom-oriented environments where they're supported and facilitated. And, you know, we've seen it with dozens and dozens and dozens of really amazing teenagers in our community.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Thank you so much for sharing all that you have shared. We are at our hour time-wise. Do you have any like events coming up, or like where can people best plug in and find you?
They can absolutely find me on Facebook. That's no problem. Omnis Education. Hello at omniseducation.com if you need or would like help or to, you know, some support in thinking differently about how to educate your kids, what this whole self-directed learning thing can look like within a family. Feel free to shoot us an email. Hello at omniseducation.com. And yeah, and I mean, I'm around, you know, just track me down and ask. I'm always super happy to help people because so many people helped us along the way.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Thank you again so much for your time. So many gems were dropped. I feel refreshed and inspired through the conversation.
I so appreciate you having me. And maybe I will see you in San Marcos. Are you going to be down there this winter at all?
I don't know. I'm actually pregnant for the first time and I'm due in January. So I don't know if I will.
This may or may not.
I may or may not, but yes, at some point, definitely going.
Oh, well, that's great! I'm so excited for you. What a delightful thing to be experiencing for the first time. Enjoy.
Yes, lots of self-directed learning going on.
So much.
Yes, it's been so fun though.
Good. I'm glad. Well, thanks so much for the time, Carla, and don't ever hesitate to reach out. I'm always here.
Oh, thank you so much. Have an awesome rest of your day.
You as well.
Yay, thank you.
Bye.